Welcome to today's webcast. Before we begin, let's quickly go over how to get the most out of this session. Your main player area consists of 3 windows: video, slides, and a multi-function window underneath. Each of these windows can be moved, resized, maximized, or even closed. If you'd like to return to the default layout, simply click the Restore button on the left-hand side of your screen. The multi-function window is where you'll find some helpful tabs like Questions and Answers, an area to download any available materials, and speaker bios. KPMG has been approved by NASBA to deliver CPE-worthy training. Today's CPE will be tracking your participation through attendee checkpoints, which will look like this. In addition to attending the entire session, you must confirm your participation by clicking Confirm each time this message pops up. Your participation will be tracked, and failure to actively participate will result in denial of CPE credits. If you have any technical issues during the webcast, please submit a question through the Questions and Answers panel, and our producers will respond to you directly. Please submit all content questions through the Questions and Answers panel as well. Thank you, and enjoy the webcast.
Welcome, everyone, to our Connected Enterprise session of our KPMG 2023 Global Life Sciences Conference. My name is Anna-Marie Detert, and I'm a partner in our Healthcare and Life Sciences Strategy practice based here in London. We also have Guillaume Favier with us, who will introduce himself and walk us through a few logistics for this event.
Thanks, Anna-Marie. My name is Guillaume. I'm a partner within our Healthcare and Life Sciences Strategy practice, also based out of London, although you may hear some French accent. I'm very excited about today as well, of this session. And for our guests who are joining us to gain CPE credits, please do feel free to look up the instructions in order to securing those. A tip is to remain logged in throughout the entire program. And of course, if any questions, please do reach out to our technical staff. And you also have the Q&A panel in case you want to ask any questions. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to now introduce Brian Cincera, SVP and Chief Information Security Officer at Pfizer, and Caroline Rivett, our Global Cyber Leader in Life Sciences.
Brian and Caroline will discuss security and patients' privacy concerns in life sciences and how organizations continue to maintain public confidence. Over to you, Brian and Caroline.
Hi, my name is Caroline Rivett. I'm a partner within London's cyber team. I focus on life sciences, and I work with a number of global pharmaceutical companies, helping them in their security and privacy. I'm really delighted to welcome to today's event Brian Cincera. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for Pfizer, but he also looks after cybersecurity and infrastructure and operations globally for Pfizer. A really interesting combination of roles. Brian, before we get too far, I'm curious about this different interaction of roles that you've got.
First, thanks for having me, Caroline. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some perspectives with your team. It is a very unique, I'll say it was a unique role when I first got it in 2019. There are actually a few other CISOs who have taken on infrastructure responsibility, as I've come to understand. For those that will recall, there's typically a great debate between the heads of infrastructure and the heads of cybersecurity. And I get to have that debate from the left side of my brain like this. The CISOs want change to happen fast. Identify a problem, go fix it very quickly. Patch quickly, update, get software updates out very quickly. Heads of infrastructure want stability. Resilience want low level of change. In fact, changes frequently trigger human mistakes or can often get confounded by human error, by other unexpected consequences, let's say. So there's really this competing needs, if you will, between stability and resilience and speed of change and resilience. And so frankly, my job makes it an interesting, but one that I've kind of grown into over the last couple of years.
And it must be an absolutely fascinating role, that combination. And I know that we're both working within security in life sciences, and I personally find that there's a real driver for this because of the human impact and increasingly as organisations digitise. And I was really curious about expanding on that with you in terms of what drives you personally in doing this role, a very intensive role. What drives you?
Great question. Actually, one that my spouse asks me regularly. I love what our industry does, and I mean life sciences more broadly, or healthcare in terms of human health delivery. I have a real passion for the fact that our jobs every single day are about extending and improving people's lives, and it's hard not to feel awesome about that as the kind of the larger picture of the work contributions that we get to make and that I get to make. I'm an operations person by my nature. I very much enjoy the forensic investigations and the incident detection and analysis and chasing bad guys and trying to position us well to be able to do the business, the kind of the purpose that Pfizer has to change patients' lives. But all of that, and including the infrastructure operations components of them, are very exciting. But I would say mostly it's that set on the backdrop of the purpose that that we have for our role, for my role in the broader industry is really rewarding.
I'd really like to explore that bit about purpose now in terms of digitisation and the rapid changes which we're seeing in life sciences and healthcare as the sector rapidly digitises. Huge levels of changes going on, which have an implication in terms of patients, in terms of the carers, in terms of clinicians, and part of their ability to be able to interact more rapidly, more accurately and faster with both healthcare organisations, but also life sciences organisations as well. And we're seeing that impact in terms of clinical trials, in terms of research, in terms of AI, machine learning, across the whole piece, but also, of course, in terms of security as well. So taking a very broad view, I'm very curious about your thoughts about the impact of digitisation in terms of security or in terms of the industry as well.
Yeah, this is probably where I spend most of my strategic time. I'll probably take a little bit of a step back. Healthcare industry, of which life sciences is a portion, to me really represents probably the widest possible spectrum of different types of organizations, different interactions with people, and different levels of need and complexity, both in their operational responsibilities, let's say resilience of infrastructure, cybersecurity resilience, paying attention to and caring for the privacy responsibilities that we have for those that we interact with. Healthcare is the widest range. You've got super big life sciences biotech companies like a Pfizer, and you've got individual doctors who are serving a series of patients in a small rural community in pick your favorite country, and everything in between, from supply chain and logistics to blood banks, mortuaries, payer and environment, consumer products and consumer goods firms, intermediaries who help provide access, governments in most cases where healthcare delivery healthcare is delivered for and or paid for by governments. So all of those different types of organizations, all trying to accomplish the same objective, right? Improve and extend human life, but with very, very different levels of complexity and interactions amongst themselves and and with patients. So I sort of set this as a backdrop because I think it does change the nature of what it means to digitize. And so for those who are wondering, like, are we still doing doctoring on paper and The answer is no, of course not. We've had digital systems like ones and zero computer systems doing healthcare or assisting us in executing the healthcare value chain forever. So the computer is not a new thing. But what is new, I characterize in three ways. One is that our engagement with the patient has fundamentally changed, and the entire ecosystem, in my sense, has become much more patient-centric than it ever was. I think that's probably most true in health delivery. It has always been about the patient, the person who shows up in front of a doctor, the person who shows up at a hospital or presents in a way needing medical care. But that is extending itself to all other parts of the health delivery value chain, in my opinion. The second thing is that we're using data to drive decision making in ways that we never have, again, in all aspects of the health delivery value chain. And the third is moving at a pace that is unprecedented. And I'll maybe step back a little bit on pharma in particular. When you and I spoke in advance of this call, I mentioned that my perception is that pharma has had a somewhat arm's length relationship with the patient for a long time, and that's changing. And I, with no disrespect to what I think is the incredible value proposition that therapies delivered by the pharmaceutical industry mean to human beings. We save lives, and that is true. But frequently, the relationship has been between the prescriber and the patient. The fact that there's a therapy, a pharmaceutical in that transaction is true, but the relationship has principally been between the doctor and the patient. And in America, between the payer and the patient, right, to make sure that I can get my bill paid and I can actually receive that medicine, but much less so with the pharmaceutical, with the developer of that product, with the scientific engine that formulated it, with the company that sells it and makes it available in a particular market. That is changing radically. So that nature of the relationship with the patient, the use of data increasingly to make good decisions, both in the development of a therapy to bring it to market, as well as in helping doctors and patients make sure that those who receive a therapy, it's appropriate for them, it's going to be best suited to treatment of their particular condition, and with the payers that we're able to actually make it available in the marketplace for patients who need it.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating because you've got this shift, as you say, which is happening in terms of the old business to consumer type organization where you went through an intermediary into a business to business type organization into business to consumer type organization. And then there's the psychology involved there of just now you're dealing with people, and rather than a set of symptoms which you can characterize by data, it's people with comorbidities, with psychology, who are interacting directly with the pharmaceutical companies. So I think big change there. And of course, then how are the pharmaceutical companies, the life sciences organizations set up in order to deal directly with people? And I wanted to pick up upon your point about the data and the patient data and the patient centricity of this. Certainly from, I suppose, one of your other strings to your bow around privacy element in terms of people sharing data with pharmaceutical companies, with healthcare organizations, in which can potentially help them be cured faster. But then people have a natural inclination to not want to share too much data about themselves, unless perhaps it's a very rare disease. And I was curious really about your perspectives here about how to move the conversation on to people viewing privacy and sharing data with life sciences organizations, particularly more positively. So then it's viewed as being an enabler to change, an enabler to better treatments, to better cures, and just explore that piece a bit more.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really challenging area. People, in my opinion, seem very willing to give up their personal information, in scenarios where they feel comfortable, and necessarily in scenarios that I always necessarily agree with. So, in my mind, I think people provide too much personal information just in social media as a general rule about themselves and about their families and about where they live and what they do and how much money they have. Like I think there's a sort of a natural tendency in social media to give a lot of personal information out in ways that I don't necessarily think are safe, or those are choices that I would make. And yet people are also on the opposite side of that coin very protective, and rightly so, of the personal information that they provide when they are uncomfortable with or uncertain about the potential uses and abuses of that information. And this is where I think our industry really owes it to the patient to communicate more broadly and to communicate more transparently about the what and the why. You mentioned rare diseases. There's a whole group of people in all countries, so this is not unique to any particular country, who will willingly give genetic information or their health record information when they know that they're making a contribution to better life, better outcomes for the world, just like people are willing to become organ donors, in the event they have an untimely passing, and to use, valuable parts of their body, right, to help save someone else's life. We do find a patient population very willing to do exactly the same thing, to make kind of that living donation of their personal medical information for the betterment of science. I think where we run into problems is where we don't thoroughly communicate the intent, and there's a misunderstanding that perhaps as I give you my personal information, you're going to be selling me gas grills and vacation timeshare properties and other things. Like, in other words, we're going to in some way, and I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but we're going to be in some way abusive of the kind of the living donation that patients have made of their data. I think as an industry, we need to do better. I don't believe that as an industry we are abusing personal information. But I'm sure that someone would point out some places where it was abused or misused. So obviously I don't want to make a gross misrepresentation. But I do think as an industry we could do a better job of connecting the value to extending and improving human life with the contribution of personal information in whatever setting that is, whether it's for your own treatment or for the betterment of the world.
I totally agree. I do think there's a lot more that we can be doing around the communication of this and the communication of the benefits of it, and also demonstrating the responsible usage of the personal data as well.
Very difficult world in which we live because of the different jurisdictions related to and the laws in those jurisdictions with respect to personal information. Most are moving towards an opt-in. Most governments, right? Most sort of regulatory or statutory frameworks are moving towards an opt-in kind of approach. But even in America, we've got 50 states, no federal preemption on privacy laws. So businesses are bound to operate by the subtle differences in rules from one state to another, let alone the 175 or so countries of the world, many of which are either have or are forming privacy statutes and personal information statutes as a way to protect their citizens.
I'm very curious, just building on that point in terms of Pfizer and your partnerships across different ecosystems, as you work in conjunction with healthcare organisations, with hospitals, and just how are you helping Pfizer and those organisations with whom you're working govern and look after the sensitive health data in those organizations?
Like most companies, Pfizer has established essentially a business process of assuring that we understand provenance and have good governance controls over the data that we collect, whether we whether we collect it like as a result of a clinical trial that we may be running and operating, or we buy it. We buy a lot of prescribing data. We buy a lot of real world evidence data, which is, or real world data, which is the results of actual patient outcomes when they're taking a particular drug, or they're dealing with a particular condition. But regardless of how we get data, through contracts and through a governance process, being able to maintain kind of a provenance, like a flow, from the point where a person consents to the collection and use of their data, all the way through its processing and ultimately its destruction, right at the point where it's necessary. Being able to maintain that provenance through the and those choices through the kind of a complicated value chain has itself created kind of a business operation within Pfizer and within companies. Pfizer, we are not the collectors, keepers, processors, and owners of data, right? We're continually growing kind of the ecosystem of how that data moves, and just as I said, we have a responsibility to do the right thing, to follow the law, but also to live up to the principles of trust that patients have when they when they're dealing with their own healthcare. It's our obligation.
And I think that's a great point to end this on. This is all about trust, and it's all about maintaining that trust with people. So I'd like to say thank you very much. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've really, really enjoyed talking with you, and thank you very much for your time.
Likewise, thanks.
Moving from security to innovation in compliance, I'm delighted to now welcome John Gitas, a partner in our healthcare and life sciences team, Jordan Seiferas, Managing Director in charge of KPMG's continuous monitoring analytics for fraud, waste, and abuse, and Matt Colford, who's a director in our KPMG Risk and Compliance Healthcare and Life Sciences Advisory Services practice.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our session on innovation and compliance. My name is John Gitas, partner in the Healthcare Life Sciences Advisory practice, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Matthew Colford and Jordan Seiferas. As an industry, we're in a period where many organizations are feeling the economic pressures to do more with less, and as a compliance function, additional pressure to keep up with the evolving uses of new technologies. In today's session, we will cover a few sample cases on how KPMG has addressed compliance risk with innovation. We are all well aware that we're in a heavily regulated industry, and results from KPMG's recent Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer Survey shows that 73% of respondents expect the level of focus on compliance to increase based on regulatory expectations and scrutiny. Overall, regulators are looking for more demonstrable evidence of compliance, domain skills, dynamic risk assessments, and overall robustness of risk frameworks across organizations. Given the regulatory pressures, our survey also revealed that 63% of compliance officers expect an increase in technology budget, as compliance technology and data analytics are the top areas to enhance. I mentioned earlier there's heightened regulatory scrutiny of new technology uses, both internally and externally. Some we are familiar with, some we're not, such as personal digital devices, AI, machine learning, automation, and of course, ChatGPT. In order to maintain compliance with regulations with a stretched workforce, innovation and compliance needs to be adopted, as this will increase efficiencies within your respective compliance organizations so that your compliance officers can focus on strategic work and as a result have higher job satisfaction. We can no longer be afraid of innovation, as we can't have innovation in the same environment that has fear. We have to embrace it, as it will change the path forward on how we work and how we live. KPMG has been making significant investments over the years to bring innovation to the compliance world, and some examples that we will discuss today is our ACP Engagement Assist solution and how we leverage data analytics and dashboards for ongoing monitoring. Let me pause there and turn the discussion over to Matt, as I'd like to get his perspectives on how ACP Engagement Assist has not only addressed compliance risk, but how it has increased efficiency and overall employee and ACP satisfaction. Matt?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So there's no operational processes with as many inherent compliance risks as those involving HCP engagement. Life sciences organizations routinely contract with and engage with healthcare providers to help grow their business, and accentuate the benefits of their products. And this can be through speaker programs or advisory boards or other fee-for-service activities. There's significant compliance risk associated with these relationships, though, whether that be risks around the amounts in which the organizations are paying those HCPs for the services they're providing, the way in which those organizations are reporting that spend to the government, or even the qualifications of those HCPs that are providing those services. Regulators are particularly focused on this area. For example, in the United States, the government has recently issued a fraud alert around the permissibility for engaging with HCPs to provide speaker programs. Other regions and countries across the globe have other target areas of focus as well. We found that our clients struggle with the operational processes and workflows associated with this area, which really opens them up to scrutiny. It increases their risk profile and increases the risk that they could be subject to regulatory penalties and fines. A lot of our clients are operating in a decentralized manner. They're working across multiple platforms and systems to execute these tasks, which makes it hard for them to report in a reliable fashion. It makes it hard for them to track and monitor the spend across contractual caps and limits, and ultimately makes it difficult for them to reconcile that spend against initial budgets once the services are provided. Our solution is designed to streamline those processes and enhance the transparency and line of sight across the organization so that stakeholders can more easily report on the spend, monitor those transactions, and keep pace with the evolving regulatory environment across the globe. Everything from the initial budgeting and planning processes through the fair market value analyses to contracting to events management and ultimately through invoicing and payment is included within the scope of our solution. So stakeholders are no longer operating in silos and no longer have to operate across multiple systems and platforms to execute their job functions. It also makes it easier to get buy-in from the HCPs that are being contracted with. And it enables those HCPs to more easily submit the required documentation necessary to keep pace with the compliance obligations through a user-friendly app accessible through their phone. It helps the organization manage their compliance obligations as well. It's also important to note here that we've already built the baseline business requirements for the tool, so we can leverage that and tailor the remainder to the specific business needs and workflows of our clients and integrate with their existing systems as needed. Because of the regulatory impact that these processes have, it's important for us to consider the monitoring implications as well when building the corresponding data model and reporting features of the tool. Aside from just building the technical solution itself, we need to consider how the monitoring implications impact the client and enable them to carry forward these monitoring initiatives once the tool is implemented. And this starts with establishing the baseline metrics. So we first create the key risk indicators that are in connection with the HCP engagement risk profile and get buy-in from the client around those metrics, and ultimately map those KRIs to the respective data fields within the solution. Once we align on those features, we can work with the client to establish dashboards that they can use to continuously monitor against those KRIs going forward and identify outlier transactions in real time for follow-up. Once that is complete, we can develop the test scripts necessary and the sampling methodologies that the client can use to implement their compliance work plan on an annual basis and conduct periodic transactional testing throughout the year to mitigate this risk area.
Thanks, Matt. And I really appreciate the perspective on how we've been able to aggregate data within HCP Engagement Assist and then the power of them being able to leverage data analytics for ongoing monitoring. Really appreciate that. Jordan, thank you for patiently waiting. We've just heard about where we've helped clients improve their data capture and drive value. Can you expand a little bit on the broader spectrum of intelligent automation and how we've helped others derive value from data?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'd love to. I did want to take some time to talk about 3 other areas of where organizations can introduce intelligent automation and innovation to support their compliance function. So starting on the left here, process mining is a fairly new technology that's emerged in just the last few years and helps organizations in a few areas. First and foremost, we think about process mining as an evolution and an innovative step forward to what individuals used to do around process mapping, trying to understand start to finish where processes occur within, for example, HCP, as Matt just spoke about. Process mining leverages the data to truly trace the process from start to finish and helps organizations identify and address process inefficiencies and bottlenecks continuously rather than periodic refreshes through process mapping exercises. Second and third cover the idea that process mining can then support monitoring of activities in real time to identify deviations from policy and procedure, to identify potential fraud, waste, and abuse, as well as operational inefficiencies. Since Matt spoke well to this second column here, I'm going to skip over that and talk a little bit about RPA, robotic process automation, which actually has been around for quite some time. However, when we think about the compliance function, we're seeing organizations introduce this technology to reduce residual risk by either taking out high volume, high error rate, or high risk activities out of the hands of employees and tasking the technology or the bot to execute that instead. It shifts the focus from individual compliance management of the individual to management of the bot. So really a single point of failure that can be audited a little bit more efficiently than the individuals. Lastly, there's the space of artificial intelligence. And for that, I think we'll jump to the next slide here for a bit of a deep dive. So the term AI has actually been around for just about 80 years now. I think first coined in 1955. But what's surprising is over the course of those 80 or so years, a consistent and standard definition of the term has never really taken off. People use it in a number of different ways. So when you think about AI, one definition you can think about is in terms of what the data is being used to do, less so than the sophistication of the approach. So specifically, you can think about the data use as something that can sense the environment by converting real-world data such as text, audio, video, photos, and sensor data into usable information, comprehending that data to develop an understanding of what's occurring, and then acting on that data to make decisions. So on the bottom here, we've listed a few ways organizations are using AI to support their compliance function within life sciences, but this is hardly an exhaustive list. There are really numerous ways that you could leverage AI to support the compliance function. But just to highlight one or two here, we've seen organizations recently leveraging AI to evaluate post-event documentation for speaker programs that are meant to demonstrate proof of event and proof of attendance. Organizations we've worked with had seen instances, especially propping up in the last 3 years or so, where the evidence that presented didn't match either the location of the events or where the metadata for the events, so things around when the photo was ultimately taken or things of that nature, didn't match the actual event dates. So by using AI, we can help the organization identify non-compliant events and potential fraud, waste, and abuse. The second one I'll call out is a little bit more timely and focuses around the concept of generative AI, as John alluded to earlier with ChatGPT. We've seen companies begin their journey from a compliance perspective with generative AI and looking to explore how they can make compliance policies and procedures more accessible to the individuals, both within the compliance function and in the business, with the idea to eventually leverage all of this data and this emergent technology to help the business develop compliant activities, develop compliant speaker programs, identify compliant HCPs, qualified HCPs, and really support the business in a way that is enabling the business on a day-to-day basis to keep compliance in mind without having to comb through all of the policies and procedures that have been developed over the years. So with that, John, maybe I'll hand off to you for some closing comments.
Thank you, Jordan. Matt, Jordan, thank you again for joining me in this very timely discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for taking time out of your hectic schedules, and hope you enjoyed this dialogue as much as we did. Thanks again, and enjoy the summit.
We will end this session with our great speakers, Steve C. Baca, Chief Patient Safety and Quality Officer at Philips, and Rajesh Misra, Principal in our Life Sciences Operations Advisory Team.
We will now leave you with great insights on patient safety and quality with Steve and Rajesh. Over to you both.
The medtech industry is currently in a state of growth and rapid innovation. The integration of digital in medical devices has enabled remote monitoring, real-time data analysis, and personalized treatment options. Smartwatches, fitness trackers, glucose monitors are more popular now. With digital health, patients can get instant feedback on their health status. Robotics has enabled less invasive surgical procedures with improved precision and accuracy. Beyond the traditional AI and machine learning, we are now looking at new category of AI solutions like ChatGPT and how this can be leveraged for the med device ecosystem. We here at KPMG strongly believe that future of healthcare is connected and digitized. With all these innovations, the one question that often comes to mind is patient safety and quality. How should all of us think about patient safety and quality while developing these new digital platforms? To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by a very renowned medtech quality leader. Please join me in welcoming Steve. Steve is the Chief Patient Safety and Quality Officer for Philips. He has more than 30 years of quality experience in medtech. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you, Rajesh. And I appreciate your invitation. And every time somebody says over 30 years of experience, I have to take my shoes off and count my toes to confirm it. But it is true, like I said. And the gray hair demonstrates that. Yeah.
So, Steve, before we get started, can you share a little bit more about your journey in the field of quality in medtech?
Sure. So the journey, like a lot of journeys, was not necessarily planned. It was kind of happenstance. And so I always tell people that, nobody really ever starts out to be in quality. You kind of get thrust upon it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a hub function, quality and regulatory hub functions. We have the great privilege, but also arguably some burden on being in all aspects. We're at the front end of product development. You talked about AI, you talked about other things. We're definitely at the front end of understanding the technology, how it applies, how do we do submissions, how does it meet the end customer needs. Then we're very much at the back end, customer service, sales support, taking that information from the field and understanding it, addressing it proactively, ideally, or reactively. And then obviously our main function is around, supply chain operations, compliance activities. So it's not something I planned, but it worked out very well because, again, I really enjoy the ability to interact at so many different levels with so many different functions.
Industry and across the healthcare. As the saying goes, first do no harm. Mm-hmm. And that's where the patient safety comes into the play. And this is our number one priority within medtech. And that's what I'm looking for to hear more from you, given that the industry is so focused on patient safety. I was looking for some information from you about your experience, that how Philips is now looking at patient safety and quality, and then how do you bring that as a part of your overall culture?
Very good. So you are right. It starts with do no harm, but I think it needs to quickly pivot to do good. We need to make sure that we go above and beyond just the creation of technology that doesn't, quote, hurt or harm anybody, but creation of technology and solutions that really provide a benefit. Patient safety is not just making sure that there isn't a risk or an unintended consequence. It's making sure, did it meet the end need, the end therapeutic, the end diagnostics? So we've got to make sure that we go beyond, quote, do no harm, to really saying, how do we do good? And so that's really the first focus. I think the secondary focus is that everything that we do, technology, process, compliance, just getting up in the morning, really should be focused on patient safety and product quality and data integrity. How do we ensure all of them? And so one of the things we got to do is just keep that in mind. I think we do get lost sometimes in technology, or we'll get lost in innovation, or we'll get lost in ensuring, quote, compliance. But at the end of the day, our goal and our mission should be that patient safety. Go beyond do no harm to do good.
That is fantastic, and that's exactly what the innovation in the medtech is driving towards. That how do we bring therapies in the market for the patients that probably may not have other options today. So across the board within medtech and life sciences overall, that's the main focus. One kind of shifting a little bit more on the patient side of it. Historically, we have seen the healthcare ecosystem is pretty disconnected between the providers, payers, manufacturers. Now we are seeing more a connected healthcare. It is just still evolving, and that's what is happening. What I'm looking for, if you can share your insights about how do we deliver better patient journeys. So it's not just about as a manufacturer or as a provider or as a payer, but how do we do a better for the patient, for the entire experience for a patient? And then how do we then come back to how do we look at the health data as well within medtech? So those are the two things, patient journey and medtech health data, if you have some data points on.
Yeah, so first, it is a journey. As a medical device manufacturer, we tend to over-index and over-focus on the actual procedure, the use of the equipment, the use of our technology. Really, we got to extend that further upstream. And what I mean by that is take into account the patient journey. In a lot of cases, that front-end journey is around a couple things. One, education. How do we further educate the patients of the procedure, of the technology, of the use of it? Two, how do we bring comfort to the patient? Bear in mind, if you're going in for a surgery, or if you're going in for a procedure, you have a natural nervousness, apprehension. You're concerned. And it could be a quote simple procedure, but in the eyes of that patient, it may not be that simple. It has a personal aspect, and so we've got to really get further upstream. And the medical manufacturers, in unison with the physicians, the providers, et cetera, how do we get further educated, further connected, to your point, but also further human? Really, how do we make sure that journey starts with understanding, acknowledging the apprehension, but how do we not minimize it, but just further comfort? Then obviously we focus on the procedures. That's really where our technology has to take into account. And then how do we make that part of the journey as seamless, painless as we can? How do we make sure that it's truly complete? But we also, as part of patient safety, take into account the various outcomes. Obviously, we are designed for positive outcomes, but we also need to make sure we're designed for potentially not so positive outcomes so that we get out in front. And then I think at the back end of the journey, and that's where a lot of the connections come in, further education, further connection. Customers are really looking for, and patients are really looking for, that full care continuum. Front-end education, upfront engagement, the procedure, the process, the therapeutic diagnostics itself, and then the back-end follow-on, follow-up. And so we need to make sure that we are supporting that, facilitating that through data. Everybody now with an iPod, iPhone, iPad has instant access to every bits of information. Well, we got to make sure that, one, we continue that connection, but two, we make sure that there's an understanding and knowledge with data. Just because you have access doesn't mean you have knowledge. And so we ought to make sure that we also give that context and content. And so we've got to make sure that we apply that. And I think the last thing we need to do, even though there are, quote, do no harm and do good, we need to, as an industry, continue to foster the use of data, technology, analytics, all these things, because it's going to further expand and enhance the overall patient treatment and safety. And so we need to look at all angles, not just the procedure process. That's been historical viewpoints.
And Steve, that's a really good point. And looking at the trends that's happening, we are seeing more and more direct-to-consumer devices, at-home care, giving more access to patients. So they can take charge of their entire healthcare ecosystem and how they interact with the providers, the payers, as well as the medtech companies. So I was more looking for a little bit more about your views about how do we simplify that for the patients? how do we talk about the iPad and other mobile platforms that patients have access to? Is there anything that you are thinking you guys are doing in terms of implementing that kind of platforms that gives more access to the patient directly and give more data in the hands of patients?
Yeah, and I think it's three ways. I think we need to change our mindset. Historically, in most of the industry, has been centered around hospitals, physicians, clinical sites. And so we've been able to establish very intimate relationships with that. And we almost take it for granted. Whereas the industry, to your point, and the trends are heading more to, expanding that further downstream to the consumer directly. And so we need, as manufacturers and as industry, need to expand our working model and working processes to do that. And so we've got to figure out, how do we create that same intimacy multiplied across the consumers? And so we need to do a couple things. One, ensure that we are providing access and easy to use access to the consumers. Two, we need to make sure that the consumer has the richness of the data that they need. And that three, that we provide them pathways to seek guidance and additional questions. In this industry now, there's only a few handful of companies that are really good at consumer, but that majority of us aren't good at the consumer technology or the consumer, trend. And so we need to get further up front. And so those are the three areas that we need to do that, whether it's directly in the instruments itself or via accessories and other support mechanisms. But we need to expand our viewpoint from the classic physician, hospital, clinic to now literally your neighbor next door. And so we need to really expand our horizons.
I mean, Steve, that's a really good point. And one thing that we see is oftentimes industry and the entire healthcare ecosystem defaults to, if I give this to patient or direct to consumer, safety is a concern. Mm-hmm. And maybe patient will do or maybe not aware of and make some decisions based on the data or the platform that I'm providing to. So the medtech safety in the direct to consumer scenarios, is there any barrier that you see that's happening more in the industry and that's kind of slowing down the adoption of direct to consumer platforms, or there are other barriers as well?
I think there's a couple barriers that come in handy. There's a volume barrier. Again, when you're dealing with historically physicians or hospitals, the numbers, while still pretty significant, are much less than the volume and scope when you have a consumer product. And so you have to make sure that your systems, your processes, your thinking take into account that volume. Two, you have to take into account different maturity or starting points in terms of knowledge. When you're dealing with hospitals or clinicians, you already have a pretty good understanding of the user, their skill sets, their understanding, their maturity with the medtech industry. Whereas now that doesn't really exist or is not as mature when you go to a consumer. And so we have to make sure that we are not waiting for the customers to get mature, that we're helping them in the maturing process, and that we need to be out in front of them. And so we need to make sure that our systems take into account. The third thing we have to take into account, especially with patient safety, is now you're dealing with a user base much broader, much more wider in terms of scope and understanding. And so that we need to make sure that we take into account all the different potential variations that could happen. The intended uses and potentially intended misusages. We've got to take into account all the different parameters out there. And so we can't just limit ourselves to, our classic, a physician and only a physician trained will ever utilize this equipment, will ever utilize this procedure. And so they know everything they need to know. Now we need to expand to this. No, now there are different variations, and that we have to take that into account. And so that we need to really challenge ourselves to look at it more broadly, to really almost challenge ourselves to what, quote, could go wrong as opposed to what's going to go right. And so we need to look at it from multiple angles. But I think those are some of the key elements that, as this trend to go greater and greater into consumer and really in a faster pace, we need to even be faster in some of our historical reactions.
So Steve, thinking through this, probably it makes more sense to think more broadly that how the product is going to be used.
Yep.
Because intended use is much more broader now, and a consumer can use it in a different way than I never thought of as a manufacturer. it was easier for me to control when I'm selling it to a healthcare facility or a provider.
Exactly. And that we need to take into account. And we need to challenge ourselves to look at it from multiple angles. And we tend to run a very clinical viewpoint. Here's the steps. We know the physician will follow it. We know these things, et cetera. And even in that model, we do have issues and circumstances where that's not always the case. Then when you get to a consumer product, a wider scope, wider scale of users, it even magnifies that even more. And so that we need to really get our focus around not just the, quote, intended uses, but potential unintended uses and consequences. And then how do we compensate for that? Via design, via labeling, via education, via multiple ways. But we just can't assume that it's not going to happen. We have to almost assume it could happen.
So Steve, shifting a little bit more on the platform side of it, at HIMSS, Philips announced that joining forces with Amazon on bringing Philips Health Suite to cloud and advanced AI-enabled tooling for clinicians. So I was more looking for any thoughts or insights on how within the products or within med devices, automation and predictive insights can help improve patient care. Is that new feature function? Is it also a cost play that I can do more with the data that I have because I'm building AI-enabled tooling within my platform? So if you can talk a little bit more about the strategy on the platform side and how that impacts both patient care at the lower cost as well as safety.
I think it's all the above. There definitely is a lower cost play. Is if you can, a couple things. If you can get more predictive diagnosis therapeutics sooner, then obviously the outcome for the patient is better. And so that means the cost to the total ecosystem is better. If you can, manage, manipulate, and utilize data, especially in bulk data, in a much more efficient, effective manner, then there's cost savings there too. But I really believe that innovation like this, utilizing the AI tools, the machine learning tools, and all these other avenues of connection, I think it really is around how do we improve patient safety, patient outcome. And I think that's really where the benefit is going to land, is that not only do we get further upstream in terms of the diagnosis and treatment, but further acknowledgement of the different disease states, the different situations, the different parameters that now come into play. We can take, your data, Rajesh, and say, okay, in a predictive model, what would that look like, 5 years from now? What could we do 5 minutes from now? And so I think what we want to try to do is utilize the data for its intended purpose. 1, how do we improve patient safety? 2, how do we improve patient outcomes?
That's perfect, yeah. And talking about AI and machine learning, we have to talk about ChatGPT as well. It's such a buzz across the industry. Everyone I talk to, they're all looking for how do I enable this? How do I bring this within my platform or within my ecosystem as well? So I want to see if you are thinking through ChatGPT and these kind of AI technologies and how that will help medtech companies.
So the short answer is yes. And Philips has a long, rich history of innovation. And so we've been at the forefront of many of these technologies well in advance. And we see the ChatGPT as another means and another enabler. And so we want to encourage the use of technology and innovation in enhancing patient safety and patient outcomes. But we also want to be cognizant of, like any new technology, like any new practice, we have to better understand its intended uses and potential consequences. We need to make sure that we are truly accounting for what could go right and equally what could go wrong. And so it's really balancing both, balancing the use of the innovation and technology, encouraging it, but also making sure that there aren't any things that we didn't think of or assume in the design and the utilization of it.
So Steve, one last thing, looking for the future, I want to see where you see medtech heading in next 3 to 5 years. We talk about a lot of innovation that's happening in the industry. I want to get your perspective on what the future looks like in next 3 to 5 years. And the other thing is that the patient safety and quality issues that we talked about, will we see some new options or solutions to address those safety concerns as well?
So on the patient safety and the product quality, I just see us getting more refined and more precise. I see us getting more in tune, because as we expand the marketplace, to your point, consumers, as we go further and further, in the consumer areas, as we get into more literally wearable technology, that you can do, as we get into more personalized medicine and personalized therapeutics and diagnostics, is that we're going to have to really up our game as it relates to patient safety and quality. Because of the new variables, because of the new technologies, because of the new uses. I think, you're going to see even more rapid utilization of data, more rapidization of AI, machine learning, and things of this nature. So I just think we're just starting to see the benefit of it. And as we gain more benefit, I think it's just going to increase and accelerate the use of it. I think the last big trend is that expectations from physicians, clinicians, consumers, patients, et cetera, is not going to go, quote, backwards. I think you're going to see a higher demand, more demand. I think they're going to push the envelope of ensuring that not only are these things, quote, given, but they're absolutely a given. And so I think that's going to force all of us, myself and Philips and every industry leader, to really take those things at the forefront of what we do every day. We do that today, but it's only going to become more prevalent, more expected, and more of a, quote, given.
Steve, totally agree with you. We are seeing the same thing, that the consumer base is a much more digitally native consumer base. So the new consumer base, the entire ecosystem, we see that connected, more digitally smart, enabled, and looking for those things that we do that in a normal day-to-day. So the expectations are different. The way patients are looking for their data, their health data, that's all going to be different as well, and that's an exciting opportunity for us and for the industry as well. Before we conclude, any last word you have for the audience? Anything else that you would like to share?
Just a couple things. 3. 1, thank you for the opportunity to join you today. Appreciate that. 2, we are privileged and obligated to be in such an exciting industry, and so we should take advantage of it. Make sure that we push the envelope from a technology innovation, but push the envelope in terms of patient safety, product quality. How do we go from what was historically acceptable to what's the future expectations? And how do we shorten that distance? The third thing I would say is, I would encourage everybody to really say, how do we broaden our horizons? How do we make sure that it's innovation and patient safety? How do we make sure that it's product quality and patient outcomes? We've got to make sure that we look at this with a wider, broader lens. And so again, I'm privileged to be in this kind of industry. I hope the rest of you also find that privilege exciting, but still an obligation and a challenge for us to continue to grow and innovate, but more importantly, always keep the patient first and foremost in mind. But thank you, Rajesh. I appreciate the opportunity.
Steve, we are super excited as well to work in this industry, and on behalf of KPMG and our audience, I would like to thank you for taking time to be here with us today.
What a great way to end this session of the summit. We hope to see you on our final session for the summit, which will start in just a few minutes. If you have any thoughts or key takeaways from this session that you'd like to share, please feel free to drop them in the post-event survey.
I hope you enjoyed our Connected Enterprise session. What Steve said truly resonated with me. As a reminder, please do remain logged in for the duration of today's program in order to secure your CPE credits. As always, if any questions, please do reach out to our technical staff, or please do use the Q&A window on your panel. Thank you.